as we dig in here, the big takeaway from today is you're probably at a point right now where January is either the start of Q1 or the end of your Q4, and it's territory planning season. So you just got a set of new accounts, or you're about to get a new set of accounts. What we want to deliver for you today is a framework that you can use to find quick wins and get the year off to a really great start. We see a lot of mistakes in this area, everything from reps working all of their accounts from top to bottom to kind of stumbling around and not knowing who to contact. And there's nothing worse than getting a new year off to a slow start. So we want to help you avoid that. Got a great guest today, my man, Nick Sigelski, founder at 30 Minutes to President's Club. Nick, I don't know. How many webinars have we done at this point, dude? It's like too many to count.
Do you count a podcast as a webinar? If you do, almost 300. If you don't, I don't know, probably 50 in the last 4 years. I love them. I love getting a jam
Yep.
with you. We're gonna have a fun time. I think
No,
we're gonna
absolutely,
talk
dude.
about some strategic stuff, which I saw a couple people put in the chat about wanting to be more strategic. We're gonna talk about working hard, and we're also gonna talk about not making yourself utterly miserable and working 86 hours a week.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think one of the big reasons why I like collaborating with you on stuff like this, you like to get super tactical, which we're going to do today. If you're finding Outbound Squad for the first time, my name's Jason Bay. Most people call me Jay Bay. We do sales training, coaching, consulting, all that kind of stuff for both individual reps, so SDRs and AEs, and then also sales teams. So people looking to turn strangers into complete customers. Okay, let's start with a question. Let us know in the chat, how many touch points does it take for you on average to set a meeting? So add together like your phone calls plus your emails plus your LinkedIn touches. Nick, when you're prospecting, so you do a lot of this for sponsors,
Yeah.
where do you get a lot of your success? How much time do you usually put into a prospect, or how many times will you reach out to someone?
I would say it takes me 4 to 5 touches to break in, but I think that is unusual, and the reason
Yeah.
for that is I, sell to marketing leaders at sales tech companies. They advertise on my podcast, my webinars, etcetera, and I'll usually break in via a warm referral of, like, a rep at that company who's a fan of our
Yeah.
stuff. But it still takes me 2, 3, 4 meetings, and frankly, the hardest part is when I get a meeting with someone that's not a good fit, and I'm like, "I
Yeah.
shouldn't have even booked that in the first place." That's the biggest waste of time for me.
Five touches is pretty buddy. We have everything from 20 to a couple people said three to 25, big range. The reason I ask you this question is this is sort of the latest data on how many touch points it takes to set a meeting. I mean, Orem just did a big study for 2023 State of Sales Development. Over 100 people, 1,000 people, excuse me, participated. And the reported range really was like 3 to 15 is really kind of the hot zone. Bridge Group does their annual study every year, average attempts over time. So between 2014 and 2022, and I'm really curious what they find in 2023 in their next report. You can see like the average attempts that a rep will put into a prospect before stopping. Like it just goes up every year. And the point of this is that it's not becoming easier to get a hold of people, you guys, especially through traditional channels like phone and email. So the objective, when we talk about territory planning, the objective that we're going to go into today is the goal is not to treat your accounts equally. Outbound is extremely hard and labor intensive, and it's super important that you choose really wisely and where to spend your efforts. And one of the best lessons I've been taught in sales is that you don't want your sales pipeline to look like a pipeline like you see there on the left. You want it to look more like a martini glass.
Mm.
In other words, you want to find out who's willing to spend a bunch of time on. You want to sink that pipeline into like more of a martini glass and like really focus on the good opportunities where it's really good to spend a ton of time with them. So Nick, what I thought would be good to do, let's talk about your firsthand experience doing this. Prior to 30 Minutes to President's Club, you were selling. I can't imagine selling into this is such a hard vertical to sell into, but you're selling into lawyers and law practices, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more your journey, getting your accounts, how you thought of it, all of that kind of stuff. I think this would be a good kind of way to set this up for everyone.
Yeah. So I sold to law firms for a long time, and I sold to law firms as big as like 500 attorney law firms and as small as like 2 attorney law firms. At least that's what my territory was. And I remember my very first job selling to law firms, and I got this territory list of, I don't know, probably 600 law firms in my territory, all sorts of sizes. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to work this list top to bottom. And so I sorted the list from the biggest law firms, because those were the biggest deal size, to the smallest law firms. And I just started going and working my way down the list. And I didn't do any sort of like 80-20 exercise. I didn't really think about how did those law firms match up to how good of a fit they were for me. And I did all right. Like I put a lot of muscle into working that list. Um, but I think I got a little bit smarter as time went on. And I learned some things that made me say, okay, like some of these 3 attorney law firms, they can't afford what I'm selling. And this 500 attorney law firm, they have way too complex requirements for what I'm selling. I probably shouldn't be putting a lot of effort into prospecting these folks. Alina put in the chat, how can you explain what you mean by 80-20? 80-20 means it's also called Pareto's principle. It's the idea that 80% of your results should come from 20% of your efforts. Said differently, 80% of your wins are probably going to come from 20% of your accounts. And so, Jason, we can talk about when I learned that lesson, how I shifted how I worked my territory. But you might have some points you want to add, and I'm cautious of not monologuing for too long.
Yeah, I mean, we should like 80-20 exercises. It's very interesting because it applies across a lot of different contexts in your life and in sales. And the whole principle here is like relentless optimization.
Mhm.
It's my next, deal that I'm going to close should look a lot like the last 10 deals that I closed. How
Yeah.
do I double down where I'm already having success? But what were some of those patterns? And then what we're going to do here, you guys, is we're going to give you some specific, like a list of things. We're going to rattle off a list of things, and there's an exercise that we recommend you do to find some of these patterns. But what were some of the things that you found, Nick?
Well, the biggest one to like make the 80-20 really, really real. So I sold accounting software to law firms. And one of the biggest players in the legal tech space is a company called Thomson Reuters. And they had a particular product that had incredible market penetration. It was something like 30% of the law firms out there used this specific accounting software that was created by Thomson Reuters. And then about a year into my tenure selling accounting software to these law firms, Thomson Reuters said, hey, we're actually end of lifing this accounting software. And so every single law firm, 30% of the market that used that software had to buy a new piece of accounting software. Jason, I closed those deals at like a 10x rate compared to the folks that didn't need to make a switch. Now that was a beautiful opportunity that was handed to me that was happening. And for those who think, oh, it was incredibly easy, well, there was a swarm of folks who said, oh, we're going after those. So those were often very competitive deals. But I learned that it was a far more fruitful yield of my effort to go after those folks than it did the 500 attorney law firm who a year ago had already bought a new accounting system and was using SAP or something. And so that's a just extremely straightforward example of figure out where there's the opportunity and go after the opportunity. Do not go where there is zero opportunity. And so what you should do, we're going to talk about, is think about the criteria and the attributes of where your best clients are and go there first before you go after the places where there might not be as much fruit, if you even go there at all.
So I think looking for compelling events like that one is a really big, like, where is their natural urgency? So I'd heard some a rep refer to the other day. It was natural urgency. Like, where can I look for opportunities where I don't have to create some of this urgency? Um, so I think the first exercise, let me kind of pull this up and then let's just kind of rattle off. I think, Nick, this would be good to just share a bunch of examples.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share my screen here in a second, and I'm going to show you guys an exercise that you could do here. All right, so we'll get a copy of this to everyone before you leave. We're not going to share it right now because it'd be very distracting. You'd be scrolling around and spoiling everything we're about to show you. But you'll get a copy of this document. Okay. Um, it's going to have kind of a written form, everything that we just talked about today, all of the data, all of this kind of stuff, the martini glass shaped pipeline. What I want to focus on first is this. So a really great way to put this strategy of I'm not going to treat my accounts equally. I'm going to cherry pick. A really good first exercise to do is to reverse engineer recent wins. So Nick, um, what it sounds like for you was really big is there was this compelling event
Mhm.
where people were switching away from this specific type of technology. Can you refresh my mind again? There was a few other things I think around employee count size that you
Yeah.
looked at. And we'll just kind of brainstorm with you guys here as a group, like other things that you can look for. But what were some of the things that you found?
So things that I were looking for were, like you said, employee count. I really looked at the number of attorneys. I looked at the type of law that the law firm practiced because the way that a firm did their books was often impacted by the type of law that they practiced. I looked at how many offices the law firm had because as they add offices, particularly internationally, it adds quite a bit of accounting complexity, some that we could handle, some that we couldn't. And so that would help dictate were we a good fit or not. I also I got to understand like tech readiness sort of had an impact for some of these law firms. It was amazing. As recently as like 2020, I would call law firms and I was selling a cloud-based accounting software, and there would be firms who were like, "We don't want anything in the cloud. Anything has to be on premises." Okay, well, those firms wouldn't be good fits. And frankly, if I went to the law firm's website and it looked like it was designed in 1952, which I know there weren't websites then, I was like, okay, this firm probably isn't a good fit. So I'd look for stuff like that. I would look for engagement in. There were a couple like industry like trade associations, and typically folks who were more engaged in those were more forward thinking as it related to their accounting system that they would bring on. I also looked at, I had some pretty good data on the current accounting systems that these law firms used. Obviously, I went after the ones who had that end of life software, but I knew there were like five or six other accounting softwares in the space that there hadn't been a lot of investment in from some of the competitors. And I knew I had a better chance going after, it's amazing, some of the names. It was like Omega and Rainmaker were the names of these softwares. And I knew if the law firms were using those, we had a better chance of replacing it. One other thing to rattle off, I looked at the number of people in the law firm's accounting department because more people typically indicated more complexity. And that would often dictate could we or couldn't we work with them or help
Oh,
them
dude,
really.
there's so much gold there. So let me ask the audience this. Let me know in the chat. Let's kind of go through each of these layers here just on the screen. This is kind of like a really great thing to do. I would say every 6 months you should probably do an exercise like this. If you're selling enterprise, if you're doing something that's SMB that's like pretty quick, maybe you do this once a quarter. Let me know. Give me the number of industries that you sell into, like your current account list. Yes, I'm going to be sharing this with you guys. Give me the number of industries within your current accounts. How many different industries do you sell to?
So 25, somebody put
Jeez, dude,
15 to
25 is
20.
insane. Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm seeing it's either people have a ton or people are having one. And I would encourage the folks who are thinking that they just have one. Like I just sold to law firms, Jason. That's just one
Yeah.
industry. But I'm telling you, the way that an insurance law firm operates is really, really different than a white collar client crime law firm. And I could consider those totally different industries. And so I would encourage the folks who are putting one to think about things that way too.
Yes. So I think there's two kind of takeaways here. So yeah, it's very evident that the group is kind of all over the place. What I would really push you to do is if you look at the last 10 deals that you won, if your accounts represent multiple industries, I want you to say, hey, there's 10 industries that I sell to, but I tend to win most of our business in these two. So moving forward, in terms of like a territory planning and how I attack my territory, I'm going to really blitz those industries first. I'm really aware of like the problems. I think this is the hardest thing, Nick, was selling into multiple industries is dude, just speak in the language, man. Like
Hmm.
I'm so focused on SaaS and professional services for the most part. That's completely different than selling to a manufacturer
Yes,
that has B2B reps that are trying to get people to use their products, for example. They might not even know what a BDR or SDR is, you
totally.
know? So that language is like so hard to master. You got to think about Skepticism is the number one thing that you need to overcome early in the sales process, especially through outbound.
Yeah.
You do that by speaking the language like that the prospect speaks, the language they speak in their industry. That's really hard to do when you got to do that for 10 industries.
You're totally
So
right. Well, when you
go ahead.
narrow down the ICP, which is really that exercise that you're doing in the industries that you sell to, you can then make the investment in learning that lingo by consuming content that is designed for that industry. If you sell to law
Yep.
firms, you might go subscribe to a legal tech newsletter or a law firm accounting principles webinar series, which, gosh, those things exist out there and they are a lot of fun, let me tell you. But you can't do that for 25 different industries. And so you're right. You have to make an investment in how you work your territory, but also in how you upskill and make yourself an insider for your buyer. So you're not like throwing words out there and like, what the
Yes.
heck are you talking about?
Okay, let's talk about what to do if you feel like you have only one industry vertical, because I think there's some nuance to this that's super important too.
Hmm.
So you've mentioned with lawyers, like, dude, a brilliant hack, and we're going to show you guys how to do this on Sales Nav, like really easily. Is you said, hey, accounting department, if it has above number of X employees, that's an indicator to me that there's a whole team of people that are probably dealing with like a lot of complexity that my solution can solve for.
Yep.
I'll give you some other examples. I work with a company about to do an SKO with them next week that sells into hospitality. So think like hotels primarily. There's very different types of hotels. There's like the solo owned mom and pop type of hotels, and then there's like the Hiltons of the world. Two very different types of reasons why they buy their solution.
Hmm.
Two very different types of personas that we're speaking with in those examples as well. So if it's one industry, a lot of people mention K through 12. Like think about how you approach the LA school district in all of their schools. That's very different than where I grew up, the Brookings Harbor School District with 5,000 people in the town. You know what I'm saying? So, like, think about how you segment within that vertical. If you primarily reach out to SaaS, there's a lot of different types of SaaS companies. There's different stages of funding in those companies too.
Hmm.
So think really clearly on like how I could find the niche within that industry. And you're going to get that really by doing a really good exercise here of reverse engineering. So the second thing that I want to talk to you guys about, drop for me into the chat. When you look at the last 10 deals that you won, what was the one persona? So a persona would be, it doesn't necessarily need to be the job title, but like for me, VP of sales tends to be the person I really want to like get involved in my deals. That's not usually the person I meet with first,
Hmm.
right? So what is the persona? Is it a technical leader? Is it someone in the C-suite? Like, where is your best foot in the door where you're like, this person's most likely to really champion and help me create and mobilize, to use Challenger speak there, mobilize the deal. Drop those into the chat for me. The
Brilliant.
goal of this, so like Helen dropped in marketing director and VP. The goal of this exercise is for you to say, you know what, I sell to these 6 different industry verticals, but I noticed that retail is where we get 80% of our business.
Hmm.
I noticed the persona that we really want to speak with early on tends to be a director of marketing. And now, you know what I'm going to do with all of my accounts? I'm going to say, I'm only going to start with retail vertical directors and VPs of marketing. Those are the people I'm going to focus all of my outbound on effort on first. I'm the most familiar. We have the most social proof. And these are the people that really get our solution. That's the goal of this, you guys. And again, for those of you just joining, 80-20 rule, Pareto's principle. Essentially, what we're doing here in a nutshell is we're saying we have a lot of success doing this. How can I emulate that and have my future effort reflect my past success? That's what we're going for here. The other thing, too, Nick, how did you think about social proof in terms of
Yeah.
like not just dropping a name of a company into an email, but social proof in terms of how do I kind of look for clients, potential clients, prospective clients that look a lot like our best clients? How did you think of that? And how do you think of that part?
I think the way that I thought about it was less from a prospecting perspective, Jason, and more from a were we going to win the deal or not perspective. And what I mean by that was like, okay, I knew that if I prospected a CFO at a law firm that used this technology that was this big, probably could get a meeting. But for whatever reason, my software did really, really well with insurance defense law firms. And I started to realize was because we had so many insurance defense clients, we actually had the company I worked for had been around for something like 40 years. And so there was so much built into the product that was specifically designed for these insurance defense law firms. So I'd be talking with them. We'd have a discovery call, right? And they'd be telling me, oh, we're dealing with this, we're dealing with this. And I'd be like, oh, cool. When we meet, I can show you how we help with the deductions and rejections that these insurance carriers give you on the bills that you send out. And they'd say, really? And say, yeah. And we'd show them, and my SE would be able to show them exactly how we mapped to this insurance defense law firm use case. And our win rate was so much higher for that reason. And so I was thinking about it from two perspectives. One was, who am I landing the meetings with? But then two, like, where am I actually winning the deals? Because the worst use of time as a salesperson is to work deals that don't actually close. You spend hours and hours and hours working these deals that don't go anywhere, and you don't make any money off of it. You're working for free on a deal, which that's part of the game. You're not going to win every single deal. But I think from my perspective, I wanted to spend as much time. There's a quote that I heard, which is pick the deals that you're going to win and then win those deals. And that was how I was thinking about social proof, which isn't the word I would use, but I think that's what you were getting at.
Yeah. It's again, I don't know how to say this without hammering home the 80-20 principle. This has got to be like the guiding principle behind how you territory plan.
Well, here's how
Where do
I
we
would
win?
hammer it. How I would hammer it home to steal the mic from you, which is you only have so many calories as a human being that you can invest in your job in any given day, week, month. And I think there's this old way of thinking about sales where you work 70, 80, 90 hours a week and you work yourself to death. And if you've got 800 accounts in your territory, yeah, I work every single account to the bone, Jason. I work so hard on Sunday. I'm not hanging out with my family. I'm preparing to prospect these accounts, let me tell you. And I just think that's a crummy way to live. I think what we're advocating for is saying, okay, if I have 800 accounts, which of those, which 20%, which I guess is going to be, I don't know, I can't do the math, which 20% of 800, somebody tell me in the chat. Which of those accounts are really worth my effort? And if
60.
I'm going to work, okay, 160. Thank you,
I had to do
everybody
a
who
little
has a
calculation
calculator in
there.
front of you. Okay, that tells me probably 160 to 200 accounts in my territory are really the best fit accounts for me. And even if I'm still going to work those same 80 hours in a week, instead of equally spreading it across every single account and working them all equally, I'm going to treat my territory and my personas in that territory at each account unequally. Because if it takes me 7 touch points to book a meeting, it's better for me to allocate those touch points, those additional touch points into the CFO of the insurance defense law firm that has 3 offices that uses the software that is sunsetting, as opposed to prospecting the 2 attorney law firm that just bought a new accounting system. All we're talking about is reallocating your effort into where you will get the most yield.
Yep. Money. Okay. That's part one. So what I recommend, and we'll share this document with you guys here in a few minutes so that you can have it, is do an exercise. The starter version of this is that sheet. Take your last 10 deals, do this analysis on it. The 2 or 300 level version of this is like export your account list from Salesforce and run an analysis on it. So you can use ChatGPT to help you out and kind of analyze the data. But like really look at like the last 6 to 12 months, where do we win the most business? If you're a new rep, look at the top reps at the company. And don't just look at the top one that's like the anomaly of the group. Look at like the top 5% of reps. Where do they tend to win? Okay, so second part to this is, how do we take this information and start to use it in a practical way to kind of prioritize what we're going to do next? So there's a couple things that I recommend. One is you analyze the results. What you should take away from this is there should be particular industries or niches that stick out to you where you want to land more meetings. There should be particular areas of social proof that you have where I have this client and these clients that we have really good case studies for. And
Mhm.
if I can share that in the email or in the phone call, that's going to help me land more meetings. There's going to be personas that stick out to you. there's specific solutions, etc. And then lastly, what I wanted to mention, because I just figured this out with the client too, and I added this section a couple weeks ago. They were like, "Hey, we actually found that two out of the last 20% of the deals that we landed last quarter were like really small and places that we feel like we shouldn't have spent time." So what you might find from this exercise too is that there's areas where you shouldn't spend time. And by the way, we want to answer as many questions as possible too. So if you guys have questions, drop them into the Q&A. Um, a couple people asked, what if you don't have a defined territory, which is kind of the same question of, we have 1,000+ accounts. What should my expectations and touch points be? They're kind of sort of related questions. If you don't have a defined territory, this should be an even like easier exercise for you
Mhm.
and more important for you, honestly. Take your past wins and make sure that your future efforts reflect them. So good questions. Okay, so let's talk about the next part. This is where I want to talk about LinkedIn, and this document's going to walk you through like how to do everything I'm about to show you, like in detail. So let's talk LinkedIn first. There's a couple things that I think are really underrated here. And before I start sharing it, give us a sense in the chat. Um, if you do not use Sales Navigator, put no into the chat because the list is of people that use it is probably pretty big, but I'm curious what the list of people that don't use it are. Yeah, I don't know if they do free trials, Nick, but this is like some of the best $80 a month that you can spend if you use it properly. Um, okay. So here's how you can use Sales Nav to help with some of this stuff. Zoom Info is also a great resource to help. I want to first talk, let's say that we've done this exercise. We've figured out that there's particular types of accounts that really stick out to us, and we have a current account list in Sales Nav.
Mhm.
So these are just 33 like kind of example accounts that I used for myself. There's some really simple things that you can do to prioritize these. One is headcount band. So I can look and say, hey, like this range for me is like my sweet spot, like between 200 and 1,000 employees. I could say I'm just going to hyper focus on those 10 companies,
Yeah.
right? That headcount band could be a really good one. Headcount growth is also a
Mm.
pretty good one. So one thing that I like to look for, because I provide sales training, if a company is not growing, that's usually not a good thing. They're probably not going to bring a sales trainer in. It
Totally.
depends on the context, but it depends. Like they're probably not going to want to bring a trainer in. Let's put it that way.
Can I say something to what you
Yeah.
just said there,
Go
Jason?
ahead.
You said it depends on the context. And that's an area that I see a lot of salespeople trip themselves up, where they say, "Oh, but like there's an edge case where if they're declining, we won a couple deals last year." And what you're saying is like, for the most part, if they're growing, they're a better fit than if they're not growing. And so it might be able to say, oh, it depends on the context. If they're not growing, I might include those folks that aren't growing. It's not worth your time. Those aren't your 20 those are not your 20% that yields 80% of the result. So even though it's an edge case and it's worked before, you actually have to have the discipline to say, I'm not going to chase those, even though we've had some semblance of success there before.
Exactly. Yep. So company headcount growth is super big. Another thing that you could do, and this is a little bit different for me because these companies are categorized with certain industry categories that they're all software companies though.
Yeah,
Right. So it's going to be a little less applicable for me, but if you found that there's a top two industries, do you have 800 accounts in here? That's a really great one to filter for. This is actually the one that I wanted to show. So what we can do is
wow,
actually see yeah, there is an accounting one like you had talked about. That would have come in handy for you.
totally.
There's all kinds of departments that you can look at. You can say, hey, I want to look at a minimum teams that have a sales team or department that is growing by at least 10%. You can see that narrowed a list of 38, I think it was, down to 9. So like these would be like really good for me to focus on. Yeah, department headcount growth is pretty badass, Mia. So that's a good thing to use. Um, Technology, I find this filter is not like super awesome, but you can filter for technologies. You can filter for companies that are hiring. So again, if a company is hiring in general, that's a pretty good sign. And then one of my favorite ones too is recent activities. Who's had senior leadership changes, who's had funding events, etc. Paul, I use Apollo. They're a good tool. this types of stuff is it's not going to play quite as friendly with your Salesforce instance, in my experience, as what you're looking at here.
The job
So
ops one is really interesting, Jason, because I
yeah,
think you can find some prospecting goals in um, job postings. Like if you actually read the description, you can get a pretty
yeah,
good sense of like it'll talk about what the goals for the department are. And like
yeah,
I could look at job I remember looking at a job posting for a billing coordinator that a law firm was hiring for, and there was a thing where it was like it basically said it's a plus if you've had experience doing an accounting system migration. And I'm like, I'm going after this account.
yeah.
And so I love mining those for like research personalization gold.
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff that you can look for. Like I was just did a first sales call with the team yesterday, and I was looking at the marketing people that they were hiring, and it said the reason why they're hiring a new head of marketing is they're trying to grow their upmarket business. So they
Mhm.
do $100 million plus in ARR right now, and very little of that is with enterprise companies. So like me knowing that going in is really big, right? Um, so the other thing to kind of point out with LinkedIn, and we're not sponsored by LinkedIn, by the way, even though it might
You
seem like
should
that the
be,
way that we're
Jason.
channeling
They
it right
should
now.
be paying you.
But so you can also save the searches. So if you click here, you can have it save a search and notify you.
Mhm.
Um, so this before we move to the other section, because this is kind of like we're just lightly getting into the good stuff right now. Nick, just because we've been talking about this and you're like getting this set up for 30 MPC, like how are
Yeah.
you thinking about using this? And how would you think about as a rep maybe using this portion?
So the way that I'm thinking about this right now from I sell to marketing leaders at sales tech companies is what I'm going to do is I there's I don't know there's probably something like 600 700 sales tech companies out there, but I've determined that there's really about 150 200 that I'm actually going to be able to sell to from a like we were talking about ICP size perspective. Um, I'm going to go into this and I'm going to upload my list of the accounts that I have in my CRM. And then what I'm going to start to do is I want to look at those job changes, I think. I want to see when a new marketing leader is hired there. Because I'll likely end up prospecting those folks. The other thing that I'm thinking about is I also have a database of, I don't know, 50,000 people that have signed up for my webinars, downloaded content, given me their contact information in some way. And I'd love to be able to match those folks against, okay, if a sales leader who's been a fan of 30 Minutes to President's Club moves to an account that I want to sell to, I'd love to be able to get in touch with that person and say, hey, I've heard you're a fan of ours. I saw you joined this thing. I want to sell to your company. Can you intro me to your CMO? Like that's sort of how I'm thinking about this. From a law firm perspective, I would use company headcount to determine the size. I'd probably upload an account list. That might be easier too. I don't know if the
That's a
technology would have the accounting system. I definitely do that department headcount. I want to see the accounting department changes for sure. Although the other thing that I'm thinking is I'd like to see a big spike in growth because another trigger for me was if one law firm absorbed another, if they acquired another, that often was a trigger event.
yeah,
And so I think I'd want to see stuff like that. I also might use like Google Alerts or a tool like Owler to monitor stuff like that,
yeah,
though.
cool. Let's get to the really exciting part of this. So Peter in the chat is he's been patiently waiting for us to go over this part. So um let's talk about how to search for contacts. This is where it gets like really, really cool and very interesting. So I can filter against my account list, my current accounts, and I can do a bunch of stuff from here. But let's just make sure that I'm looking for the right types of people for me. So let's say I'm looking for people with sales in their title. I'm looking for vice presidents. I'm looking for directors. Let's look at CXOs as well. And let's start with that. Okay. So I could do a couple things here. One of them is I can continue to do company-based searches if I want. So I
Mhm.
can look at the company type, where they're headquartered, et cetera. Like I can filter by headcount, all of that kind of stuff if I really wanted to get and find the sweet spot. I think one of the first things, and we'll just kind of go down the left side here, that I like to look for is years in current company.
Hmm.
So I can look at, and the reason for this is User Gems has got a lot of great data on this. Executives, newly hired executives, tend to spend the majority of their first year's budget in their first 100 days. It's pretty crazy, right? So
Uh,
one of the things that I can look for is people that have been at the current company for less than a year. There's also a job change function right here that you can look at. But these are all people within my current accounts that would be great for me to reach out to because they're like newly hired people. It's a list of 68 people for me to go after. That's a really, really good one. So if you're not doing this one, this is one of the quickest ways that you can prioritize the people within the accounts that you're going after, like who to reach out to first. I think we're always trying to find people that really want to change things. That's one that I like a lot. Another one that's pretty cool too is years in current position. So you can look for someone that's been like recently hired. This is a little bit more manual, but you can look for someone that's been like recently hired. So if we look at this Dave guy, for example, let's just see.
yep.
Yeah. So he's a new VP of sales in his first year at that company and has worked at Everbridge in the past. Yeah, so there's like a lot of great things that we can find here too, where let's look for someone that's maybe in an executive role, like a VP or CXO, and I can say who's only been in that role for less than a year. Likely these people now have like a P&L or a budget, right, that they can spend.
Jason, how about that posted on LinkedIn filter under recent updates? Do you see it? It's underneath changed jobs. So
Yeah, so
this
this
is
is a pretty good
showing
one too.
they've recently posted on LinkedIn, which means, oh, this guy wrote about enthusiasm in sales 6 days ago. And so this is interesting because you might be able to use that in your
Yeah.
prospecting into this guy. Um,
Yeah. I think one of the things when people are researching on LinkedIn, Nick, is they always say, well, this person doesn't do anything on LinkedIn. It was like a waste of time to look at their LinkedIn profile. Well,
yeah.
this is a pretty easy way to sort for that.
Yeah.
If I'm looking for something to mention about the person, let's just see if they're posting and reposting things. And it's going to be different depending on your persona. But like, dude, this guy just ran a marathon or no?
Well, I guess a
Oh, this
friend
is to
ran a
support a
marathon.
coworker.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's funny. But if I was reaching out to her, I would, because I've run a marathon before, I would mention that.
One thing that I started to do is I found that it can be tough when you're prospecting to every single time have to think of something like totally creative of like, okay, this person ran a marathon. How do
Yep.
I relate that to my payroll processing solution for my prospecting message that I send? And what I tried to do is like bucket the like 5 or 6 types of things that people would post about and just like come up with really easy transitions. I feel like the transition between personalization and here's what I'm selling and why I'm reaching out to you, like your value prop, that's the hardest part. And so I feel like if you can come up with like, oh, here's stock transitions that I can use, it makes it easier to go from,
Yeah.
okay, this person loves chihuahuas, how am I relating this to people ops software? Like there's a way
Yeah.
to do it. You just have to put the muscle into pre-planning your transitions.
Yeah, or put it into the PS too. If it feels like too much of a stretch,
Ah,
it's like, oh, hey, congrats on the recent marathon. I ran one myself, about 10 years ago. You know? The PS, I think Lavender's got some data, like the
yep,
response rate is like 2 or 3 times higher with a PS if
yeah,
used correctly.
I saw that.
So that's a pretty cool one too. Um, let's kind of keep going, keep dropping in questions. So you guys got them. Yeah, Kelsey asked, how do you get this list down to your specific territory? That's where you're going to want to make sure that SalesNav, you can manually upload a list, an account list into there, or you can sync it up to Salesforce if your org has that set up. Um, so let's look and see what are some of the other ones that I like to use. Following your company, I don't really post a ton. You actually might have a ton of these, Nick. You
Yeah,
can filter
viewed
for
your
people
profile.
following your company.
How about viewed your profile recently?
Yeah, this one's cool too.
I mean,
This is like a deal that I'm working right now too. So I should reach out to this guy,
yeah,
huh? Um, but yeah, you can look for people that have viewed your profile recently too. That's a really great trigger. So someone that you've been trying to get a hold of, maybe clicked on your LinkedIn profile, accepted your connection request, whatever it might be. That could be really big too. Look for people that are following your company on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
Best path in. This is another kind of pretty cool one too. Is like we could go. Let's look.
Uh-oh, Jason's about to start asking me for intros, everybody.
Yeah, so these might be people I would ask you. Do you know? And this is a deal that I just closed. Lost. Long story.
Ugh,
But Devin, do you know Devin?
I might. I'll have to check
Yeah,
and see if we've
he's
exchanged
connected
some
with you,
messages.
right?
Um,
I'm not
well,
going to ask you for an intro to him, but
this is another
that's an example of something I could do.
the other I keep rudely interrupting you, Jason, but this is another like 80-20 sort of philosophy is use the easiest tool for the job to break into an account. And what I mean by that is we talked about 80-20ing your accounts. And then, so you get to your 160 accounts, right? Those are the 20% where you think
Yep.
there's the most yield. Then we talked about the 20% of human beings at those accounts who are your best fit, right? I've taken my full account list and I've pared it down to, whoa, nice. I've taken my full account list and I've pared it down to the 20%. Then I'm going to
Yeah.
take that 20% of accounts and I'm going to pare it down to the 20% of contacts at those companies who are the right fit. We talked about the persona stuff. Like, okay, I need to land a meeting with the director of sales or the VP of sales. Those are the people that I have the best success with the first meeting. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out, okay, we know that cold prospecting, cold calling, cold emailing, a bunch of random LinkedIn DMs are really hard to get a meeting. They take a lot of calories. I'm going to look at those contacts. Let's say there's 2 contacts at my 160 accounts. That is 320. I can do some math here. I'm better at multiplication than I was division. I've got 320 human beings that I feel like are my best fit personas. Now what I'm going to do is, my guess is about 20% of those folks I could get a warm intro with. Or an exec at my company knows an exec at that account and they can help me break in. Or I'm going to a trade show next month and I see they're going to be at that trade show. And so instead of me ripping a bunch of cold calls and being all macho about how I work my territory, I'm going to do the easy stuff first. I'm going to book meeting. And then when I'm like, wow, there's no more easy meetings to book, then I can do the hard cold prospecting. So I think it's a continual refinement. 80-20 your accounts, 80-20 your contacts, 80-20 the way that you break into those contacts.
Yep. I think this is a good segue to answering, Katie Nelson in the chat asked, can we talk 30, 60, 90-day plans with
Yep.
prospecting? Your 30-day plan is to do what we're showing you right now.
Yep.
It's find all of the low-hanging fruit within your accounts. That's the very first thing that we're going to work. We're going to get introductions. Where do we have, I think another one I want to show you actually too. So Katie, hopefully this gives you some ideas, is you can also look for past companies of current clients. There's a very
Mhm.
manual way to do this, and then there's a way that your ops team can set this up for you. I'm going to go through the manual way because you're probably not an ops person, but you can enter in your past companies into this list. So, for example, one thing I can say is, hey, I did some training with Zoom a while back. Since then, actually an SKO I'm doing next week is a leader that used to work at Zoom that is now at a new company. I can systematically reach out to people who have used my products or services or who are currently using our solution that have moved on to a new company that is not using our solution yet. That's a really, really good one. I think that one would be good for you too, Nick, where you're following, like, hey, who are all the sponsors that we have and like who's moving to a new place that could be a good sponsor, right?
I'm setting that up
So
after this
past
today.
companies, super good one.
It's really good.
Um, what's up, Charm? I've known Charm for a while. He's dropping in some good stuff there in the chat. Um, so Katie, that's how I would think of 30, 60, 90-day plans. Like the first 30 days is all of this low-hanging fruit. There's connections, there's past colleagues. So people that you might have worked with in the past, people you share experiences with, people posting on LinkedIn. News, in my experience, is a little hit and miss depending on the news. So sometimes they have good, like, stuff around like maybe layoffs or product announcements or whatever it might be.
One note
There's
on
filtering for people you've interacted with, viewed their profile, message, etc. There's all kinds of stuff.
Jason, one note that I have on 30, 60, 90 plans. is I would encourage you, Katie, if you haven't, everything in the plan should be things that you can control. I've seen salespeople put stuff in there around like, oh, I'm gonna book X number of demos, or I'm gonna have X number of deals closed, or I'm gonna have be at this quota attainment, and you don't control those things. I mean, certainly those are those goals, and you need to like find a way to hit those goals. But I would encourage you to um, have the full 30, 60, 90 be focused on your inputs, the things that you can control, rather than your outputs, the things that happen. I would also encourage you to think critically about like, what are the things that you feel like you need to do an awesome job at your job? And I've used 30, 60, 90 plans as an opportunity to go to my boss and be like, hey, here's some areas that I need some support, or here's a training that I feel like we need to do, or here's like, I really want to learn from Michelle. Like, she's the top rep on the team. I'd love it if she could, like, I'd love to sit down with her for 20 minutes and understand how she's demoing. Like, do you think you can help ask that? Because I don't really know her that well. I would encourage you to put stuff like that in your plan as well.
Yep. So I'm going to show you guys one last thing, and then we'll open it up for questions and all of that kind of stuff. I think part of territory planning too is just knowing, like, dude, what kind of activity do I need to put in?
Hmm.
So, like, here's a good kind of calculator for an account executive or SDR where it's like, hey, here's my quota, here's what it is per quarter, here's my average deal size, how many deals do I need to close? And then putting in all of your metrics. Hey, from an outbound and selling point, like, what is my conversion rate of meetings? What's the show rate? What's my win rate? How efficient am I? And generate like a weekly activity target for yourself. Hey, how much outbound activity do I need to put in? How many intro calls do I need to run? So having some math, some sales math to support the plan can be pretty big too. So I'm going to drop in
Everybody
a
wants this
couple
sheet,
things.
Jason. People are begging you for it.
Okay, so calculator, drop it right there. I'll also drop in this sheet as well. And then Nick, let's just do some Q&A, dude. Let us know, you guys, in the Q&A, what questions do you have? What can we help you with? And we'll kind of go through some questions here. Let me drop this in.
There's a
Okay.
question. Where do we get this calculator document? Oh man,
There,
it's in the
drop
chat
both of
now.
them into the chat for you guys.
Oh, I love it.
Okay. So let us know. We got about 10 minutes left, you guys, for Q&A. We'd love to answer as many questions as we can for you. And feel free in the Q&A, you guys can vote on the questions too. So okay, this is an interesting question, Nick. So what have you done when your sales management is pressuring for huge pipeline? I agree that quality is better than quantity. However, when pressure is applied in my area, there's huge pressure to see daily new leads, but my success has come from working the most high quality leads. And essentially the question is, how do I deal with pressure from management? I know that I get wins working on the high quality stuff, but I have a manager, let's say, that's really hounding me to just like add new leads, reach out to
Hmm.
more accounts, etc. How would you think about dealing with that?
I would schedule some time with your manager to build a plan together. And then what I would do is I would use Jason's calculator and say, hey, I mean, I would basically put together a 30, 60, 90 annual plan of like, hey, based on how I've performed before, here's how I'm thinking of hitting my quota. Here's my plan. Here's the number of contacts I'm reaching out to a day, the number of accounts. Here's some messaging that I'm planning on using. Like, I would show them anonymous attendee, it sounds like you're doing pretty well working some of these quality leads. And my recommendation would be like, hey, based on my past performance, here's my plan for hitting goal or even exceeding goal. And I'd love to get your feedback on things. Let's go through this together. And then what ends up happening is you show your detailed plan for how you're going to get to your number. And then one of two things happens. Either your manager is going to say, hey, this looks awesome. Keep going on this. Well, great. Now you have their approval to do what you've laid out. And frankly, most managers are going to be like, holy cow, this is great. Like, you actually put some thought into how you're going to hit your quota. Most reps won't do that. The other outcome that might happen is they say, hey, we need to make some adjustments to this. And that's okay. Now you have the opportunity to have an open and honest conversation with your manager about what expectations are and how you both are going to get to the plan. And this isn't where you should be defensive or angry or combative. This should be an opportunity for the two of you to explore together, like, hey, how should we be working together, rep and manager? how are we going to get to this number? I think the whole goal is you and your boss should be on the same side of the table and making a plan together. And you should take the first step forward by putting together a plan and have a safe, non don't do this in your pipeline review. Don't do this in your weekly sales meeting. Set some dedicated time aside with your boss.
Yep. Treat your manager like a client, you guys. Like, this is objection handling. The first tip for objection handling is to try to understand where the other person's coming from. You guys, sales managers, I think, have the hardest job in sales. It's like they get no training usually on how to do their job, and there's just so much pressure
Yeah.
on the sales manager. So just kind of keep that in mind. They're like being really like uh hyper focused on your activity and your output because that's what they're getting asked from their VP. So if you can present the plan, that's a really great one. Um, okay, Paul Schroeder and Chris Ashley are asking a very similar type of question. And it's essentially when we go after a new industry, what's the best way to tackle this?
Hmm.
If I could start with this, I think there's a couple things. As a rep, I want to push back as much as possible on spending time on a new industry if you guys already have industries where you've seen success. So I want to push back as a rep and really go, hey, 80% of my effort I want to spend in areas where we win deals, and the other 20% I can focus on being the guinea pig for this new territory. I always see reps get in trouble with this where they go all in on the new industry that the company wants them to. They don't win any business for 6 months and then they get fired. So don't do that. Like, you want to push back and try to let 20% of your effort be the guinea pig type of stuff. Really, the biggest thing with this is you need to find like the next closest industry. So try to find stuff that's not too far of a stretch. So for example, like if you're reaching out to healthcare and you primarily work in retail, there's a retail component to healthcare.
Hmm.
So it's like, how can we help you apply the customer service best practices that have worked so well for Nordstrom? There's like an angle that you can take. So think about the industry verticals you're focusing on right now. Like, what best practices would this new industry like to adopt from that industry vertical that could be applicable? Any tips from you, Nick, on approaching new industries?
Yes, I think a lot of salespeople over rotate on consuming content that is designed for salespeople, meaning
Yeah,
they sign up for
stuff like
532
this.
webinars each year. They listen to 14 different sales podcasts.
Yeah,
Um, and that stuff's great. I mean, hopefully you all are finding this helpful. My rec would be if you're selling into healthcare for the first time, go listen to a healthcare podcast that's related to the space that you sell. And if you sell to law firms, go subscribe to a law firm newsletter and start consuming that stuff because it will teach you the language that your customer uses. And that is essential.
yep. Customer language. There's so much. Yeah, we could have done a whole webinar just on that. Um,
Yeah, but my advice is I only have one piece of advice, which is go subscribe to a newsletter and listen to a podcast. So it'd be a short webinar from me. I think you have better tips than me.
so thank you. So Jacob Harris asked, "Do you ever tell a prospect they are low hanging fruit for you? How would you phrase this?" I don't think you need to tell a prospect that they're. I can tell if this is a serious. I hope I'm not offending you, Jacob. I can tell if that's a serious question. I would not tell a prospect that they're low hanging fruit. I think you can phrase it a little differently.
Totally.
Like, how might you tell a prospect, Nick, that's like they're a new sponsorship opportunity and they're just
Yeah.
like in the sweet spot for 30 MPC? Like,
Yeah.
how would you convey that to them without saying, I can tell this deal's pretty ripe, like you're low hanging fruit for us,
Yeah.
kind of thing. How would you say that?
Yeah, I think his name is Jacob. I don't think that's like the intent I think is right if that's a serious question. You're right. The phrasing is a little bit like, "Oh, that's sort of weird." It's more like, "Hey, I'm really excited to be working with you." Part of the reason is we do really well with companies who the way that I would actually say it is like, hey, we do really well with companies who the market thinks they do this thing, but they've actually added some new product functionality and they're really trying to change the market perception of what they do. And what I've heard from
Yeah.
you is that like that's one of your big goals. Basically, what I'm saying is, hey, we do really well with this type of person. You are that type of person based on what I've heard from you. The inverse of that might be like, hey, like I want to let you know, like we're usually not a great fit for companies that only have one marketer on the team and aren't totally sure if the sales persona is like 100% right for them. They also sell to RevOps, they also sell to marketing. But as I understand it, like what you told me here and here, I actually feel like we're a pretty good fit. And so I'm excited to like continue to explore with you. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm telling them it's the attributes of what I've learned from them are a good match versus you are a good match. And I don't ever want to say, you're a perfect fit. Or I don't want to say, oh, you remind me exactly of this client over here. People want to feel like they're special. And so I like to say, you sort of remind me, or you're pretty similar. People don't want to feel like they're a replica. They want to feel like they're special, but you can tell them they're similar. And I think that helps.
Yeah, totally. People want to, just like when they go to any type of specialist, they want to know that you've seen their situation before. That's what you want to. I think later in the sales process, especially, it's all about like reaffirming that they're making a good choice,
Yeah.
right? So Sarah asks, how can we use social proof in our messaging without getting into trouble with our current clients? I think we kind of step back, maybe Nick first, and answer the question: how do we leverage social proof? Like, what's appropriate use of name dropping clients? Why we might consider doing that? Why we may not consider doing that? Do's and don'ts, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think one area to be cautious of is I don't want to mention Walmart if I'm talking to Jason's corner store, right? Those are totally separate types of businesses. And even though they might be in the same segment, retail, Jason's corner store is him and his wife selling bottled water and snacks. Walmart is
Yeah.
huge. And so I think you want to be cautious of like sizing. Um, I think there's times that like social proof, like when I'm talking to prospective sponsors, Gong is one of my sponsors, and I'll frequently mention them because a lot of these companies that I sell to, they want brand affinity the way that Gong has, and so I'll mention that frequently. But I think I try more frequently to talk about attributes and use that as like, a lot of the insurance defense law firms I've been talking to have been really frustrated with how their insurance clients push back on their bills because they don't match the specifications that they have. And I'm looking forward to showing you in our demo like how we can help validate against those things. And so I think I try to lean more into like the use case stuff and make it very, very clear that I get their world versus that I'm just dropping names of customers.
Yeah, so be very specific with the companies that you choose to talk about and name drop, and really through customer stories is really where you want to do this. And if you don't have permission to share a client's name, don't use it, obviously. So,
Yep.
you guys, that's all we got here. I think the big takeaways from that worksheet are: one, reverse engineer your wins, and then two, use those reverse engineered wins to reinforce the effort. So your past successes determine where you spend your future efforts. And then if you got LinkedIn Sales Navigator or you don't, I recommend signing up for it. Use that as a tool to like really contextualize and make this information easier to access. That's all we got for you guys today. Nick, good spend time with you, man. As usual, appreciate the time, and everyone else, appreciate the engagement. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Let's blow up Nick's LinkedIn profile, send him a connection request, all that kind of stuff. And we'll see you guys. Have a good one. Later, everyone.
See y'all. Thanks for joining.